Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Rui, JINSA's Fellow for American Strategy. Thank you all for joining today's timely webinar on, quote, America's third carrier in the Middle East. On Tuesday, news broke that 11 U.S. Air Force F-22 Raptor stealth aircraft were en route to Israel from air bases in Europe. Those F-22s arrived at Ovda Air Base in Israel's far south, marking the first ever operational deployment of U.S. combat aircraft to Israel. JINSA first recommended U.S. basing options at Ovda in a report last fall entitled Base for Success. As part of the research for this project, a JINSA task force conducted a fact-finding mission to Israel, including flying in to see Ovda Air Base firsthand on the ground. That report is available on JINSA's website, along with a shorter brief we issued yesterday with updated context for JINSA's report in light of this new F-22 deployment to Ovda. To discuss the significance of these events, JINSA's work on basing options in Israel, and the larger context of Iranian tensions with the United States and Israel, I'm pleased to be joined by our expert panel here today. Lieutenant General Joseph Costella is a former Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at U.S. Air Force Headquarters. He was a co-author of JINSA's Base for Success report. Lieutenant General Charles Moore is a former Deputy Commander of U.S. Cyber Command and a member of JINSA's Iran Policy Project. Both Generals Costella and Moore have been participants in JINSA's Generals and Admirals program in their capacity as retired U.S. Air Force general officers. IDF Major General Amikan Norkin is former commander of the Israeli Air Force. He is also a JINSA Distinguished Fellow and provided invaluable support and context for our task force on the Ovda base issue. For our audience, everything discussed here today will be to the fullest extent possible, given that this is a public and unclassified setting. For our audience, please feel free to type any questions you may have into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to them in the time we have. So General Norkin, I'd like to start with you. Can you indeed clarify for our audience that these F-22 aircraft are at Ovda, and this is the first combat deployment or operational deployment of U.S. combat aircraft to Israel? And I ask that because that still seems to be a question, at least here among some people in the United States.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm honored to be part of this webinar with the two lieutenant generals as friends. First of all, it's not the first time that the American Air Force or the American military deployed combat jets to Israel, but it's the first time that we got here the F-22. And I would like to start, with to put us all on the same page. First of all, to deploy out of United States such a technology to the Middle East like the F-22, it's not part of the American Air Force routine. This is not part of the region. And I think that the best place to deploy this to Israel. Why Israel is the only one that flying F-35, and there are some common technologies between the F-35 and the F-22, and Israel can support the American Air Force by logistic technology and other areas. And so from the tactical level, to be part of American fleet like the Israeli Air Force with the F-15, F-16 and others, so it's almost to be at home. Second, we just visited this base, General Costella and myself, as part of the team that work on the report about the American base in Israel. And part of this report, we mentioned that to build such a base and to bring American assets to Israel, it's a power projection. And now the F-22 in Israel, I think it's another layer of deterrence that the American military project, especially from Israel. The third part of my answer is that it present the American commitment to the Israeli security. Once you are landing with your best airplane in Israel, I think that everybody here in the Middle East and around the globe understand the very strong commitment of the American government, American military, American president to the national security of Israel. So this is from the tactical level, let's say, to the strategic level in 3 points. And of course, to have such a capability like the F-22 capability at the battlefield, once if something might started and happened, it will support not just Israel, it will support also the nations around us like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Emirates with the best technology. And the American Air Force can, let's say, secure the borders with the best technology from cruise missiles or drones, and one in the defense mission and the offensive mission, of course, can be part of the very wide spectrum of capabilities that the American military holds in the Middle East right now.
Thank you, General Norkin. And I'm glad you touched on some of the larger issues, not just the details of this deployment itself. And I want to circle back to those later on in the webinar. But General Norkin, just a quick follow-up question. You mentioned this is the first time F-22s have been to Israel, American F-22s, obviously. Have there been other American combat aircraft in Israel for exercises, like the F-35, F-16s, things like that?
Yes, so for many years, the American Air Force, even the Navy aviation and the Army aviation, they all been in Israel. General Gastella himself, he flew in Israel, let's say, maybe 25, 30 years ago. So it's not something new that we are flying and we are doing exercise. We are doing here the blue flag, like the American red flag we do in Israel with 8 different nations, and the American Air Force is the major partner. So it's not something new, and we also deployed with the Israeli Air Force to the American bases as part of our exercise, at least in the last 25, 30 years. So we are flying together and we can do missions together, but for the first time, it's the best American combat aircraft, the F-22.
Thank you, General Norkin. General Gastella, I'll turn to you now. First of all, kudos for wearing your JINSA Generals and Admirals swag on the webinar. Always appreciated. So I would like to get the American perspective now, since it is an American plane. And I do realize, and I'll caveat for our audience, we have a panel filled with F-16 pilots here. I'm going to be asking about the F-22. With that caveat included, General Gastella, can you offer our group some idea of, perhaps why F-22s, or we often hear about it being, a cutting edge plane, one of the best in the world. Why is that?
Well, no, thank you, Jonathan, and thanks to JINSA for this opportunity. Yes, as a couple F-16 pilots, myself and Charlie, we know the F-22 is one heck of an airplane, and it is phenomenal to see America's top air dominance fighter there in Israel, right there at Ovda. The F-22 is indeed the most air-to-air capable fighter in the world. Nothing comes close to it in the air-to-air role, and it just like Amakim said, it's there as a deterrent role. Initially, it's there to allow the United States to negotiate with strength, because everyone knows that aircraft is designed to establish and maintain air superiority, air dominance, frankly, and that's what it's capable of doing. So it's a very clear deterrent signal, a very clear defensive signal to Israel, and then it's obviously has a very powerful warfighting role if it got to that point. And so to see it based there in Ovda, which by the way is a great piece of real estate from a air power lens. The Israeli hosts have maintained a phenomenal location to base out of, and that's why it's exciting to see what was proposed in the JINSA report that you led, Jonathan, actually, now come to fruition, and so who knows what will actually happen, but the fact that it's there is a very powerful tool for the United States as well as for Israel.
Jonathan, if I may,
Please.
just for our audience, Ovda base 10 is the southest base in Israel. It's near the border of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, and it's completely American standard base because the American troops built this base after the peace agreement with Egypt. Once Israel withdrew from Sinai, part of the agreement was that the American military will build 2 new Air Force bases, and this base is one of them. So the standard is completely American standard. So let's say American Air Force pilot that is landing in Ovda, he feels like at home.
Thank you, General Norkin, and that perfectly anticipates one more question I have for General Gastella before we start pulling the aperture back a little bit. General Gastella, General Norkin gave a very good table setting there. Could you describe, as an American Air Force officer, when we made the on-the-ground visit to Ovda, sort of what struck you as key takeaways from the infrastructure or the setting or the other elements of the base itself that are now lead to the fact that we have F-22s there?
No, like I was saying before, it is an outstanding piece of real estate from an air power perspective. For starters, the landing surfaces, the runways, the taxiways are all pristine, which is important for fighter aviation. You need quality prepared surfaces, but the support aspects of it, fuel, munitions, air traffic control, all of that stuff is just tip top. And so, in terms of allowing the U.S. fighters there to operate and generate air power unhindered is exactly what Ovda enables them to do. You don't have to wait on a lot of things that you may have to do at a more austere location. It is right there, and so you have, I would say, just like General Norkin said, feels like being home. It feels just like a world-class facility, which is what it is for a power projection in aviation.
Thank you, General Gastella. General Moore, I'd like to turn to you now. So I do want to jump back before too long and ask our panelists how OVDA fits into the larger context of U.S. force posture and basing architecture in the region. But first, General Moore, especially tapping into your background, taking a global look at U.S. forces, how do you see the deployment of the F-22s? And I believe it's meant to be a dozen. It's 11 of them. How does this, let's call it a dozen F-22s, fit into the larger buildup in the region from an Air Force perspective? And I'll note, for JINSA's audience, we have a great previous webinar with Admiral Fozzie Miller that looked at the U.S. naval component of the force buildup. So, General Moore, please.
Yeah, well, I think we've covered really well the incredible capabilities of the F-22 Raptor, why it's so significant, why this first-time deployment to Israel is so important. But the other thing that this deployment, along with all the other assets that we're moving into the region, I think is really signaling to our other adversaries or potential adversaries around the world, be it China, North Korea, or Russia, that the United States, if there's any doubt, still possesses the capability and the willingness to surge our combat capability into any region, anywhere on the globe, so that we could sustain combat operations. With the recent military excursions like Midnight Hammer, which was an in and out type of operation where we achieved a surprise and were able to very precisely take out the targets. Or same with absolute resolve down in Venezuela, achieve surprise again with the added complexity of having to put a team on the ground to do a snatch and grab type of operation. This also reminds folks that we can posture ourselves and be prepared for a long-term type of deployment and sustainment of combat capability if that's what the president decides he wants us to do. The other aspect that I would add to Ovda is that it also gives us a little bit more flexibility based on some of the restrictions that we're hearing from some of our allies in the Gulf about the type of operations we may be able to exercise from their locations, and we don't have those same potential types of restrictions. And the other thing I'll add is obviously right now we're focused in the Gulf region, we're focused on Iran, but over time, if this becomes a more persistent rotation of forces in and out of Israel, we do posture ourselves very well for any type of operations that we would need to conduct in the Eastern Med, portions of North Africa, or even in the southern parts of Europe.
Thank you, General Moore. And that last bit I do want to come back to at the end, sort of to the extent we can look beyond immediate tensions, the crisis in front of us, sort of where we could go from here. I'm glad you raised that. I guess I could sort of address this, one way or the other in terms of sequencing. But General Moore, I'll stay with you. We talk about posturing ourselves against Iran, and this is a very wide open question. To what extent we've heard the president has gotten lots of advice and been given lots of options about what he's trying to achieve in Iran and how to go about it. Can you give us any sense of what we might expect operations to look like? I know you mentioned Midnight Hammer and Absolute Resolve. I imagine we're not thinking along those lines in terms of the scenarios we're foreseeing now.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So if you go back several weeks ago when we first started seeing the protests rise and the comments by the president about not harming the protesters, and there was a lot of folks, not just in the United States, but elsewhere that were very interested in the United States taking some type of specific kinetic actions. I think the one thing that the president said during that time period, which was really important, was if we're going to take action, it needs to be decisive. And taking decisive military type action using our air, cyber, and space forces, which is what we're really contemplating here, is very difficult in terms of having decisive outcome to directly support the protesters or to result in some type of regime collapse or change. That's a very difficult thing to do. Recently, you're hearing a lot more discussion and concerns about the Iranian nuclear capability, the reconstitution of that program, and of course their ballistic missile capabilities that don't just threaten Israel, but threaten our personnel, our assets, and our other allies in the region. And those military capabilities are obviously much more attuned and capable to have decisive types of outcomes to go after those types of targets. So I think that there is an opportunity, though, to have a little bit of both. If that becomes our focus and those are the goals that the president wants to achieve, the latter that I talked about, there are some targets that we could hit that also continue to undermine the regime and support the protesters, such as going after IRGC or Basij, the internal security forces. They probably aren't sitting in dormitories anymore. They're probably pretty well dispersed, but going after any depots or any of their command and control capabilities, their ability to arm themselves, I think would be very beneficial. And any type of strategic targets that continue to really put pressure economically on the regime, taking out targets like at Karg Island or any of the refineries, that's going to continue to increase that pressure from an economic standpoint, which is really what led to the protests to begin with. Now, which of those options the president selects, we don't know. But I think what's good is that there is a lot of combat capability that's been moved into the region. And that's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm sure the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is being very specific that we do not want to limit the decision space for the commander in chief. So the more capability, the more assets we put, the more options that the president has. We don't box him in into that type of the decision that he has to make depending on where he wants to go.
Thank you very much, General Moore. Because that is such a massive question, General Costello, I want to give you a chance. If there's anything you want to add to that on this question of, what kind of operations might we expect, given that it's such a wide open question. I want to give you a chance to tag on that before I go to General Norkin. If there's anything you have to add.
No, I mean, General Moore hit the nail on the head. What can be accomplished in terms of affecting the regime's collapse from the air component is a very difficult thing to do. But I think it does send a very clear signal that we're there in support of the protesters and there to warn the regime that more crackdowns against them could result in some significant damage to what they value. And what do they value? We've already seen their value greatly diminished in their power projection capability, their offensive missiles that can threaten the partners in the region. That was significantly degraded before, but there's more left, and that's certainly something that could be targeted, as well as a lot of the other counter value things, like the economic targets that the General Moore was talking about. So the advantage of the large force that's there can hold almost any target in Iran at risk, which means we could take out almost anything there if that's what the president wants to do. And it allows him to negotiate from a position of strength and a track record of strength. And so keeping all those options on the table, although being very sober about the fact that there are limits of what air, space, and cyber and maritime power can do, in terms of a regime collapse.
Thank you, General Costello. General Norkin, I'll turn to you now. It's a question from our listeners. Does the arrival of American aircraft at Ovda undermine the concept of the U.S. Israel partnership, which is based on not having American boots on the ground?
Well, it's not the first time that America is on the ground. As you remember, the 12-day war, the American air defense system support us. So it's already been done, and I think that the Iranian threat, it's not just an Israeli threat. It's a regional threat. And the American forces support the region, not just Israel. Now we are speaking specifically about Israel, but the American forces defend Jordan and others. So we should understand that it's a regional issue. And if I may, with my friends Costello and General Moore mentioned, the American force now can support the president's decision with a very wide spectrum of capabilities. And the decision will be, the president will take the decision, but I think that if there is a military activity as part of this decision, it should be a quite wide step, not a minimal or let's say limited act, because Iran, it's a quite big nation geographically and with a very, let's say, high distance between the different targets. And if we would like to support the process of replacing the regime by military activity, the military attack from the air, from the maritime, and from the cyber, it shouldn't be, let's say, a limited step that some of the media platforms talked about in the last few days, as I understand, in the American media.
Yeah, thank you, General Norkin. Yeah, General Norkin is referring to headlines we've seen in the last week or so that the administration potentially or reportedly is considering a limited initial strike convince Iran to change, accommodate U.S. Negotiating demands, and then leaving open the option for a larger operation based on Iran's response. So, General Norkin, just a quick follow-up question. With your comments there and with the deployment of these F-22s, does this indicate to you that perhaps a long war is indeed being planned or certainly guarded against?
Well, I think that a long war, it will be a mistake. We should plan a short one. I think that the 12 days war was the right, let's say, time frame for such a war. And if we can do it in even a shorter one, it's better. This is, I think, both interest for the Israel and other nations in the Middle East, and of course for the American forces. This is my personal opinion. And with such a wide spectrum of capabilities that now surrounded Iran, we can plan a short campaign, and I think that this is the right thing to plan.
Thank you, General Costello. I'll jump back to you. So we've covered the potential sort of conflict scenarios. We've heard a little bit about what Iran could do to make that a problem, but I want to now situate this in the context of maybe why Ovda is somewhat unique in terms of a place to position U.S. forces or rotate them. Could you talk about how Ovda is part of a larger U.S. force posture in the region in terms of where we have access, where we can do overflight? In terms of, we've heard, the American public has heard a lot about all the aircraft and naval power we're moving into the region. But to what extent can these forces be used for offensive versus defensive operations against the Iranians? We've heard, our report covered how Israel would impose no restrictions on our access. How does this compare to maybe the rest of the region? I'll just note for our audience, in recent days, and I think even this morning, there's been articles about British decisions not to let the United States use the base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean in the context of this buildup. So, General Costello, please.
No, absolutely, Jonathan. And the key aspect of air power is to be able to base your aircraft, at multiple different diverse locations that are appropriate for the campaign you're trying to wage. Distances are from the countries that were the countries we're going against are critical, not too close, not too far. And also you need the autonomy to be able to do what you need to do to pursue your campaign. And so there are a lot of options in the Middle East, but all of them, anytime the United States bases aircraft in another country, it's it's allowed by that country, and which grants us access, basing, and overflight, and therefore they have a say in what we can do with those airplanes. And so depending on what the administration decides to do, what Israel offers the United States, as General Moore was speculating, and I'm speculating as well, is that that access, basing, and overflight that Ovda provides gives us a lot of leeway, gives the U.S. a significant amount of leeway, regardless of the campaign it wants to pursue, because Israel knows the United States is there will always be there to defend it and protect it, as well as address the enemies that they affect the region. So basing is a very critical aspect. Ovda offers a pristine physical location, well defended and maintained by Israel, and as was stated before, a perfect location for a lot of different effects across the region.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, General Costello. So, General Moore, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a question along these lines, given your past position with U.S. Cyber Command. I think for JINSA's audience, we hear a lot about cyber with Iran in the context of, in terms of strictly in the context of the Iranian regime's ability to shut down the internet in the country, quash protests, basically black out what's happening for the outside world. Again, we're in a public unclassified setting, but could you give us, you mentioned it earlier in the webinar, how cyber operations might fit into a lot of the more kinetic things scenarios we've been discussing so far, from a planning perspective at least?
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about it in some general terms. The first thing to remember is that there's a huge defensive cyber component to all of this. The Iranians do have some serious game when it comes to cyber operations. They've demonstrated that in the past. They continue to demonstrate that up to today. So you have to be able to harden and make sure you have resilience in our bases that we're operating from our comms networks, our ISR assets, our critical C2 nodes, our data links, all of those types of things we have to make sure are defended and that we have resilience in that regard, so we can operate regardless of what we encounter from the Iranians. Then on the offensive cyber component, there's obviously a lot of things that can be done. I would guess, again, we're in an unclassified environment. You can imagine that cyber would be very beneficial to go after the exact things that I just mentioned that we would be trying to defend. Our weapon systems, our command and control networks, our integrated air defense systems, their ISR platforms, all those types of things would be obviously military type targets that cyber operations could be used against and to support the overall campaign. And then there's really a third bucket, which is cyber-enabled information operations that, again, I would suspect you would see and probably are seeing a lot of information operations being conducted using cyber against, say, IRGC or Basij, senior leadership, mid-level commanders, and the like, explaining to them what's going to happen if we end up in a kinetic environment, what's potentially going to be the end game for them and their families, and what those alternatives might look like.
Thank you. General Gustella, we've had a question from our audience that picks up on a theme we were already discussing, which is overflight and access. What routes are available to reach Iran in view of the overflight denials or restrictions that you've discussed? If the U.S. can't overfly certain routes.
Well, I am not involved in or aware of, what each country's particular restrictions may be in this particular circumstance. So I can't comment on operational issues. And frankly, I don't know them. I do know that, there are multiple paths to project power in that region. It could involve flying directly over neighboring countries. It could involve flying around them using tankers. The United States has a tremendous tanker force, and that's really what enables that power projection at distances. And it enables the flexibility of air power to fly around restricted areas or through paths that are maybe not permitted by certain nations. But the fact that we're there in the region at Ovda, with what Israel's granted us is the ability to base there, and all the other parts of the air component allow us to project wherever we need to. So I can't comment on the actual restrictions because I don't know them.
Sure, thank you, General Norkin. I'd like to go back to you. I guess we've heard a lot of American perspective on how to think about a conflict with Iran, but I haven't had the privilege to ask you yet. The view from Israel. Unlike say last summer, where it was, I would say Israel had a much more urgent sense of the threat that motivated the start of Operation Rising Lion. Maybe today that balance has shifted a little bit, but that's a question. What is from Israel's perspective, maybe even leaving aside the F-22 deployment, what does the current sense of urgency and scale of the threat from Iran look like from an Israeli perspective?
Well, first of all, I think that we cannot act against the nuclear capabilities every year. So it is the wrong strategy. So we need to do something that it will be behind us. So this is first. Second, we learned that the amount of the ballistic missiles, they're, let's say, a real threat on a small nation like Israel. We got less strategic assets, and our population is under threat. So we cannot allow ourselves to be under such a threat, like thousands of ballistic missiles that can threat the Israeli population. So those, and of course, the third parameter is that the Iranian involvement in the regional terror activities. But last time, I think that the Israel started the war because of the urgent threat from the nuclear program and the ballistic missile plan. So those threats are still there, not at the same level, but still there. But now I think that the Iranian, let's say, the Iranian story become a global one, regional threat, global threat. As the president mentioned, the missiles can reach Europe. The future can reach United States. This is something that we cannot allow ourselves. This is not the right future for the nations here in the Middle East.
Thank you, General Norkin. A quick follow up. If Israel and Iran return to war, to what extent obviously it's a threat, but how urgently or significantly do you view the threat from the Houthis?
I think that we should plan that and consider the Houthis as a threat, and we might see some ballistic missiles and cruise missiles that the Houthis they are going to launch toward Israel. This is my assumption.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, General Norkin. General Moore, I'd like to turn back to you. So we heard General Norkin talk about the missile threat to Israel, which as we've seen in 3 rounds of conflict in the last 2 years, and then Iran's rebuilding since the June war, remains a potent threat. But there's also another Iranian threat, which is to missiles and drones, but a threat to the Gulf, to Hormuz. So this builds into a question from our audience. Do you think Iran could temporarily threaten or actually close down the Strait of Hormuz?
I don't think we'd let that happen. I think obviously they could try to conduct some operations to make it difficult. But I think, especially considering the posture that we're in right now, I don't think that we'd put up with that. I think that would be met with a quick reaction from the United States. That's just my guess.
General Gustell, is there anything any 2 cents you'd want to add on that one?
No, I agree. I agree with General Moore. We can make it very, very painful if they did try to close the straits. Tremendously costly for them, and I think we'd be able to reopen it very quickly if it did happen. It would be a significant risk for them to try to do that, given the posture that we have there, and what all we can hold at risk in terms of targets.
Thank you. So, want to get a few more questions from our audience before we sort of look more prospectively to the future about the U.S. Israel partnership. So again, this is an unclassified setting, but this is a question we've gotten from a lot of our audience, and also more generally, we've seen it reported in the press, concerns that about the sustainability of U.S. ammunition stocks for a potential conflict with Iran, without asking to say how long you think a conflict with Iran could go, because that would depend on a number of scenarios. I guess, General Moore, I'll ask you first, if you could give our audience just a general sense of why this is a discussion point, and in general, maybe your extent of how you view these concerns about the durability of U.S. munition stocks, both for offensive and defensive systems. And I know for our audience, I like to flag that JINSA has done a lot of work on this in the previous context of Iran's attacks on Israel and the joint U.S.-Israeli defense of that. But General Moore, please.
Yeah, I think that obviously there's not an infinite amount of arms that exist. And back to General Norkin's position, that there's many reasons why any type of operation, if we elect to conduct one, you want it to be short. This is obviously another factor in that. I'm confident that we have the number of munitions that we be required to achieve military objectives in Iran if and when the president decides that's the route that he wants to go down. I also know this has become a really important factor for the current administration, and they've been dealing with industry a lot about this specific issue. How do we replace stockpiles as we use them, especially during time of conflict? We saw similar discussions right after the 12-day conflict. And then broader strategically, how do we do this if we find ourselves against even a more formidable foe? And at the end of the day, it's an interesting situation because a lot of our precision guided munitions and capabilities that we have are not things you can stockpile forever. They do have shelf lives that do affect their reliability rates. And so when you get to some of the less precision weapons or dumb weapons or basic bomb bodies or artillery shells, yeah, you can build those and stockpile them all you want. But when you get to your precision type of weapons, you can't just build over time over many different budget cycles and store them up for a time of conflict and expect that they're going to all work the way that you need them to. So how do you have industry respond and be able to generate the type of capabilities that you need when you're in those circumstances? And this is something that's getting a lot of attention right now.
Thank you. So General Norkin, to sort of ask the Israeli version of that, because I think it's relevant to a lot of discussions about looming conflict potentially with Iran. We've heard, since the June war, but also even before it, in light of some of Israel's lessons since the 7th of October, calls for Israel to become as independent as possible in terms of munitions production, supply chains, things like that. In the current context, do you think that General Moore mentioned some of these difficulties. How do you view Israel's situation here in terms of its ability to fight? Perhaps I know you said we should not plan for a long war, but in general, if given that Israel has only finite interceptors, but all other things like that, how this drive for more independence is going in the context of the current tensions.
Yeah. So in the last 2.5 years, we use ammunition like we never planned to.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we're still fighting. So, as General Moore mentioned, you need to have the basic capabilities in very wide, let's say, big storage, but it's not just the storage, it's also the capacity of the production line and the contracts that might be a better or more wise contracts with the companies that can provide you the ammunition that you need in a conflict or in emergency time much earlier. All those lessons we learned and we share them with our friends from the American military. And I think that today we have a better understanding how to, let's say, to build our ammunition and operational capabilities for the future conflicts. But still, it takes time to produce and to buy and to develop and to take all those lessons into your working plan. So, it's become part of our routine. Every time that we move forward since October 7, once we took decision to move to a full-scale war with Hezbollah, the amount of ammunition was on the table. Once we decided to open the 12-day war, the ammunition amount was on the table. So now it's part of the many other parameters that the commanders should be aware of.
Thank you. So I want to shoehorn in one quick question from the audience before I ask the final question to our panelists. I guess particularly in the context of the F-22, we start out at the start of the webinar talking about some of its capabilities, especially it's a stealth fifth generation combat aircraft. But General Gastella and more, I'll ask you: do you to what extent do you think Iran has anti-aircraft capabilities? Are there things, is the F-22 a unique capability in terms of dealing with potential anti-aircraft air defense threats from Iran? So I guess General Costello, I'll ask you to address that first.
Well, yes, the F-22 is a fifth gen stealth fighter, an incredibly capable fighter. It's designed for air to air. It was used in the Midnight Hammer campaign, and so there's been significant degradation of Iranian air defenses in the 12-day war. A lot of it was done by Israel, most of it, and but suffice it to say, the F-22 is part of the air component. The entire effort, it will be to establish air superiority, and part of that is to destroy enemy air defenses. So suffice it to say, the F-22 is more than capable of operating in Iranian airspace.
Pardon me. General Moore, is there anything you want to tag onto that before I go to the final question?
No, I think General Costello summed it up, very well. It was designed to specifically deal with what we see from Iran, even with as much of the integrated air defense system that's been attrited, specifically, a double-digit mobile advanced waveform surface-to-air missile system. This is the environment that aircraft was meant to operate and survive and be successful in.
Thank you. So I want to ask sort of we'll go around the horn. One sort of final question that attempts to the extent we can conceivably do it, look beyond the current situation and context we're talking about. Looking forward, not just at Ovda, but also what the possibilities it opens up for the future of the U.S. Israel defense partnership. So, General Costello, I'll ask you first. Right now, we're talking about the deployment of combat F-22 aircraft to Ovda, but beyond that, looking ahead, what other missions could a U.S. basing options there, rotating forces through? What other purposes could that perhaps help serve for U.S. Air Force and the Joint Forces needs, not just in the Middle East, but maybe even more globally?
Well, Ovda is a tremendously strategic location in Israel, as everyone knows, in the Eastern Med. There, clearly, it offers direct access to the Gulf countries and into Iran and beyond. It allows you to project. General Moore said this as well. Allows you to project power south into Yemen, into North Africa, as well as the Med itself, and possibly so far as into Europe. So it is a very strategic location, and it's a welcoming ally there with Israel. And so the options are significant beyond this. I would also say that it's also a phenomenal opportunity for U.S. to continue training with the Israeli Air Force and other Gulf Air Forces in the region that are willing to work together for the common good of interoperability and readiness and deterrence. And that's the message that militaries want to telegraph, is a message of interoperability and strength through coalition and deterrence. And I think Ovda offers a lot of different options, both in terms of true combat capability, but as well as training.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so, General Norkin, to you, would love to get the Israeli perspective on where what Ovda can do for the partnership going forward. Maybe if the Israeli perspective of what General Costello talked about, or other things you might have on your mind.
Well, I completely agree with my friend Gus mentioned, and nothing to add. It's both tactical and strategic opportunity that we should move forward. But for your, let's say, second part of your question, what should be around the corner? I think that there are many areas that the American Air Force and the Israeli Air Force, the American military and the Israeli military, the American companies and the Israeli defense industry can share. And we can, let's say, designate the space as a domain that we can do a lot together for both nations. And of course, the cyber We already did, and there is a very wide, that's a very open future and high potential of cooperation. And maybe to move out from the military frame, I think that beyond this conflict with Iran, the Middle East now is a different Middle East compared to October 6th. And now, after a 2.5 year of military campaign, this is the right time to let's say, diplomatic plan and diplomatic campaign, and to build a better region for all the nations, and especially for Israel, to have let's say, with the right decision, we should have a better place to live for our children, for our grandchildren, and we can bring a much better future to the region. Today, the Indian Prime Minister Modi just left Israel after an historical visit of 2 days visit, and we are speaking again about rain from India to Europe, and about energy and water and data centers, and it's the future is there. So. And it's much more achievable than October 6th, because the strategic situation, from my perspective, is much better once we are going to be beyond this current conflict with Iran, and hopefully we are going to finish the conflict in a much positive situation. And of course, as always, thank you for the American Air Force and the American military for supporting Israel. Thank you very much for that.
Well, it's not often I get to end these things on a positive note, so I'm going to go ahead and thank all of our panelists for joining here today to discuss this very timely topic. Again, for our audience, I'd recommend to you on our website, the report is called Base for Success, U.S. Basing Options in Israel. And also stay tuned for future webinars as continuing events unfold. I'd like to thank again Generals Costello, Moore, and Norkin for their time and thoughts today. And thank you to our audience for joining. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.